I'd like to acknowledge the Taranata Panir, Paninahur and Lita Myrena clans of the Stony Creek Nation on whose land this podcast is made. I recognise Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the original owners of this island who have cared for this country for over 60,000 years, and pay my respects to elders past and present. Sovereignty was never ceded, and I'm grateful to live, work and play on this beautiful country. Hello and welcome to the podcast From Experience, the Grief Collection. I'm your host, Bianca Welsh, a mum, a lost mum, a restaurateur with a behavioural science degree and a proclivity for all things trauma, grief and mental illness. So, why would I do a grief podcast? Grief is the one certainty in life, the one thing we will all face, the loss of someone or something that we love. As the great wordsmith that is Nick Cave wrote to a fellow griever, if we love, we grieve. That's the deal. That's the pact. End quote. Yet we rarely talk about it. We're never prepared for it, but perhaps we can never be prepared for it. I wasn't, but I hope that hearing other people's stories might make the dark depths feel a little less lonely and the healing journey a little less daunting. I'm curious what's brought you here today. Comfort? Ideas and resources on ways to grieve and heal? Maybe you're trying to understand a loved one going through something similar. Whatever it is, I'm glad you're here. I hope that after listening to our guest today, you'll feel a fraction lighter, you might feel seen, or simply comforted that you're not alone. Please note this episode discusses the death of a child. If this is too much for you today, perhaps come back another time. If you feel distressed or need help, please reach out to a loved one or someone you feel safe with. Suggestions of resources are listed in the show notes. Today's guest is Brock Kerslake, a primary school teacher, a dad, a husband, and someone whose story is deeply woven into the fabric of northern Tasmania. Born and raised in Burnie, Brock made the move to Launceston for high school, and apart from some extended adventures both around Australia and overseas, including living and working in the UK and the US, Launceston has remained home. It's where he studied, worked, raised a family with his wife Fee, and built a life alongside their two kids, Gus and Bonnie. Before stepping fully into teaching, Brock also owned and ran a tourism business that many locals will fondly remember Taste, Walk, Talk, walking people through Launceston in a way that blended history, food, conversation and connection. It wasn't just about showing people a place, but helping them feel it and taste it. Brock very kindly reached out to me to have a chat about his story, which I had no idea about. And that's what I'm very grateful to have of this podcast, is learning about other people's journeys and stories that might have been well and truly in the past, and it's not often given the space to be able to talk about it. So I'm very grateful to have Brock here with me today. Welcome, Brock.
Thank you.
So Brock, tell me all about your story.
Yeah, so my dad was married to another lady before marrying my mum, and they had a daughter, Britt. My dad and his first wife separated when Britt was quite young. She was around 1, and Dad quickly met Mum and got married, and along came me. So Britt predominantly lived with her mum here in Launceston and would spend weekends with us and school holidays with us, and it was very much a part of our family and Mum's life as well, because when Mum and Dad met, Britt was a toddler, so they were very close, and we spent as much time together as we could, being a separated family with step sister. So that was our life. My sister Sophie was born 6 years after me. Mum had quite a few challenges falling pregnant after me, so Soph was a bit of a surprise, and as she would say, a blessing. So we were a sort of a family of 3 for a little while. And the year Soph was born, which was 1985, was also the year that Britt died. So she was 12 and in grade 6. And one particular weekend she didn't come to visit us. I think she had something on, a birthday party or something she wanted to go to. So she stayed here in Lonnie with her mum, and it was November, so the weather was warming up. And she was mucking around with friends over the road, having a water fight, having lots of fun, and made a decision to head home to get a bucket or something to use in the water fight, and just ran across the road. It was just a suburban street here in Launceston, and not a busy road, just a standard suburban road. And unfortunately, she didn't see a car travelling down the road and was hit by that vehicle and was significantly injured, and obviously went to the hospital here in Launceston and later taken to Hobart, and the decision was made a few days later to turn off her life support because of the significant injuries that she'd received and the long-term prognosis of what they would mean for the rest of her life.
I'm so sorry, Brock.
It was a lot, obviously, but I was only 6, and I think you feel things very differently when you're a kid, or you perhaps don't feel them differently. You perhaps just have a kid's view on what's going on, and I very much had that view. It was obviously a very intense few days. This happened on the Sunday. Dad obviously headed off as quickly as he could to get to Launceston and then went to Hobart as well. I stayed home with Mum, and my sister was only a baby, so we were back in Burnie, and I think Monday was the significant day in terms of everything being discovered and working out what was going to happen. So I went to some close friends of Mum and Dad's place, and I sort of remember sort of sitting in their lounge room watching TV and the mum taking various calls throughout the day, and obviously the reaction to those calls, I could sort of overhear some of the emotions. So I knew things were really bad. I knew things were significant. So then I went home and, Mum sort of told me what had happened and that Britt had died, and then it was sort of like a flood of relatives and family members in the house, and I wasn't very emotional because I was sort of probably just trying to think about, well, I probably wasn't trying to think about anything really. I was probably just observing what was going on around me and trying to process that. I remember Mum saying, "Oh, it's okay to cry," and I didn't cry, but I think I just was just there in that time, and fairly significant seeing your family members in such a state. And I think Dad returned back to Burnie maybe the next day. Yeah, drove himself back. I only found out the other day that he said, "Oh yeah, I borrowed your uncle's car and I drove back," and I hadn't realised that's how he got back to Burnie, but I thought, oh, what an awful drive that would have been on your own, just heading back to try and get on with whatever's ahead of you.
Gut-wrenching. I can't imagine how hard that would have been to have made that decision to turn off her life support.
Yeah, it's the toughest decision, and it was perhaps in some ways more complex because it was him and his ex-wife. I think when you are separated, you develop a bit of a system of how you manage your child or children. You discuss things like school holidays and schools and school fees and haircuts and things like that. But I doubt you've ever discussed arranging a funeral and going through that intense time with someone you haven't perhaps you've finished your relationship with them in a lot of respects. You're a co-parent, but that's sort of it. Yeah, so my dad told me that he sort of grabbed the newspaper and went off and sat in the park somewhere in Hobart, and this was in the lead up to making the decision to turn off the life support. And he said he read the paper but didn't read a single word. Just sort of sat there with the paper, and it was just sort of almost like a disguise to get through that half hour or whatever it was before returning back to the hospital to have to go through that.
I feel like I can resonate with that a little bit, knowing like when there's a time frame when you know what's coming. I grappled with that myself leading up to Herb, because you do have this definitive moment where you know the biggest pain of your life is about to come. So how the hell do you spend your time? And, thank you very much for sharing that he just went and sat in a park and read but didn't read the paper. Like James and I went and got a Boost juice. Yeah. and sat in a park. Well, first of all, we sat in the mall, and that felt weird and kind of not right. So we went and sat in a park, and it's a really uncomfortable place to be.
Because you're preparing for something you never thought you'd be preparing for, and you don't even know you're alive. I imagine that's that feeling. I've only experienced it when our son was born and was quite ill. And you don't really know which way's up, which way's down. You don't even know what you're supposed to feel or not feel. So it's right. Not something you want anyone to go through, that's for sure.
No. I have so many questions to unpack all of this. First, has the thought come across your mind if she had come and spent the weekend with you as was planned?
It definitely crossed my dad's mind. Yeah, I think he held on to that for a long time. Not as in beating himself up, but just that what if. Just that what if. But it was an accident. The driver was not at fault. So I think in a way it was good that we didn't have someone to be angry at. It wasn't him speeding or him driving recklessly or him drunk. He was just driving down the road, obeying the speed limit. So it was an accident, and that thought I know that stayed with Dad for a fair while. Unusually, Britt had made some unusual preparations, which we didn't realise until after she died, that she'd already prepared everyone's Christmas gift, which was perhaps just her being organised, but it did to us seem special, I suppose, or perhaps even a little bit eerie.
Yeah.
That she'd made these handmade gifts for everyone. They were wrapped and labelled and those sorts of things. So, you can read a lot into situations, whether it's just is what it is or whether it's something really special or meaningful. It became special and meaningful for us. But, that sort of thought of what if and maybe, but you can't change that.
No, that's the saddest thing about it all is that you can't change it.
Yeah, you wish you could.
Mm. Do you remember your dad coming back a different person?
Yeah, I think so. Again, being 6, you only know what you know. You don't read too much into stuff. So Dad definitely wanted to get on with life. He went back to work the day after Britt's funeral, and that was his way of coping, and I think it worked for him. My mum found it hard because everyone would say to her, "Oh, how's Peter?" "Oh, poor Peter." Burnie's a pretty small town. Everyone knows everyone. But Mum was like, "What about me? I've raised this kid too." I mean, yes, she's not my biological daughter, but for 10 years of my life, she's been the centre of everything we've done. Along came Brock and along came Sophie, but still she was very important. So I don't think Mum was angry about that. I think just people found it easier to talk to Mum. Dad said people used to cross the road to avoid him, and he'd find that weird because he was pretty connected in Burnie, and these were people that he knew well, and he didn't feel annoyed by what they were doing. He just felt they could have just come and put their hand on my shoulder or patted me on the back. It didn't need to be a huge gesture of the speech that I know a lot of people find difficult. I find it difficult when you speak to someone who's lost someone. You never know what to say. That's not goofy, cheesy, cliche stuff. So, I think he found that difficult in that all of a sudden he was that bloke in Burnie, that poor bloke has lost a child. So he did focus a lot on his work, which he'd done anyway. But, he had that sort of, I'm going to get on with life. However I can, I'm going to get on with life,
And I think that's a natural way and I will generalise, most men will find that that's the best way for them to cope. And I think if anything, I think it's a healthy coping strategy.
I think so. And I think for me personally, time on my own can be an overthinking time, not necessarily in a good way. So if I'm busy and doing something that I've been worrying about, can seem less in the front of your mind. Obviously, Dad's situation was much more intense than that. I guess he has coped by getting on with life. I think we're one of the lucky ones because we've always talked about Britt. We've always acknowledged her as part of the family. We've always talked about her and kept her name spoken, whereas I know a lot of people, perhaps back in the 80s and before, that was not something they could do. And I know that we've met people along the way that have been in that situation where it's been, we don't talk about that person, especially a child, because it's so hard. But we've always been a bit the opposite, and it's always come with tears, especially at weddings and milestone events. You just say the name and the emotion comes. But for us, that's helped, and we've done things along the way. After Britt died, my parents paid for some play equipment to go to her primary school, which was there for a long time. And after the play equipment became too old, they notified us it was going to be removed. So we started an award at the school because Britt was in grade 6. So we started an award for a grade 6 student to receive, which is still really nice. It's emotional. Dad has struggled to go to that. He's been the last 2 years. So,
amazing.
So we're talking 40 years since Britt died and 20 years of the award being presented. So I don't think he still wants to go. I think we kind of had to sell it to him that it's not this long-winded, boring assembly. It's actually quite nice and it's quite simple and it's quite to the point. He's been the last 2 years.
That's really beautiful.
It is, yeah.
For someone of an older age, and again, generalising that men don't tend to want to feel things, face those sorts of things.
Especially in public.
It's really amazing that he goes to that.
Yeah. Dad always says, but I'll cry. And we always say, that's okay.
Yeah.
It's totally okay to cry.
Yeah.
I come from a long line of male criers. Probably my grandmothers were a little bit tougher, and probably about 10 years ago, Dad got a tattoo, first tattoo. He was watching a show. Mum and him were away in Queensland, and a show about Daniel Walkham's family, how they all got tattoos. And Dad said, I might get a tattoo. Typical dad went out the next morning, got a tattoo.
Oh my God, that's
Came
amazing.
back and Mum, he's like, I got it. And Mum was like, oh, I didn't know you were going to get it like today. But now people see that when he's playing golf, people he doesn't know, and they'll ask, and that gives him that little prompt to talk about it in a way that he's comfortable or he likes, because 40 years is a long time to not have someone. And I think the memories were so far back that he wanted to keep them here and now.
What did he get?
His first tattoo was "You'll Never Walk Alone," which is his sort of life motto. Loves the song, and he also has Britt's name with year of birth and year of death. And now he's got a couple of others, grandkid ones and things like that. So he will get a St Kilda one if they win a grand final, but that might be a way off. So that was always his threat. But
that's really cool.
Yeah, and different people do different things, you know, and that's okay.
Yep.
Like it's okay to have, you see sort of roadside floral memorials, all the fake flowers and stuff, and that's their family's way of doing something. Other people don't do those things, and that's okay too, I think.
Yeah, I think before I've experienced grief myself, I always wondered why people wanted to commemorate the place of the pain, the place of the death. But I think as time has gone on, I understand that now. And for some, it is an important part of grief and loss journey.
Yeah, it's a public thing perhaps,
Yes.
and it's also a reminder and
Yes.
maybe awareness. When we lived in Burnie, going to the cemetery was always something we did every weekend. My grandma she lived in Burnie, she would religiously go every weekend. And my dad still will go a few days before Christmas, and he'll get up at the crack of dawn and drive to Burnie, do his thing. I think he'd probably quite like us all to go with him, but that time of year we're like, oh, you go, Dad. The Burnie Cemetery is a lawn cemetery with a beautiful view, so it didn't, as a kid going there, it didn't feel as though you're in this old-fashioned, haunted, scary place. It always just was lawn and beautiful views. So even though obviously it's a place of great grief and sadness, it didn't ever feel like, oh God, don't take us to that creepy place.
Oh, that brings me to tears, imagining him going to do that. That's really
Yeah,
beautiful.
he always gets heaps of flowers and trims the grass back around the edges, polishes it within an inch of his life. Got to use baby oil. Don't ask me why, but you've got to use baby oil. Got to have a soft cloth. It's got to be a couple of cloths. I want a little broom to get the grass off. I don't think he sort of stays for long, but he stays, and it's something that he likes to do, I suppose.
That's really special.
Yeah, we've been going there now for 40 years. I don't go very often, but if we ever go to the Northwest, I always go in there with the kids, and it's where she's buried.
Do you think as time has gone on and you've experienced other losses throughout your life and you've witnessed other friends and family experience losses, do you think what you've described, the way your dad grieves, is beautiful? It's remarkable. And do you think now, reflecting and seeing other people's ability, or probably mostly inability to grieve, it's given you a really nice roadmap of how to grieve?
I think so. And I think the only other losses I've had have been my grandparents, which is sort of like a natural loss because they're older. I don't know if I could ever cope going through what my parents went through. I'm sure I would, because you have to. But that's just sort of like worst case scenario stuff. And it's, I guess, the ability to try and get on with life is you don't think you can and you don't think you will. But I suppose that's been something that I've thought you just have to keep trying for those around you, I suppose.
Focusing now on you, can you remember what it felt like? Like you were saying, sort of knew what was going on and you went on with your day, but can you remember what it felt like in your body?
I think seeing like my grandfather, for example, just distraught was, you never see that. And it's that different type of emotion that he had never felt before, or if he had, this was a whole new experience. It was intense. Like that, to me, I remember that image. It's more like I remember certain sort of images. And Mum and Dad were so confused and they didn't know what was right for me to do. It was the mid-'80s, like it wasn't 100 years ago, but I think parents think, how can I protect the other kids? How can I make this as less harmful or traumatic for them? And Mum or Dad must have spoken to my school and said, what should we do? And they said, well, we think it's probably best if Brock just keeps coming to school and probably not go to the funeral. And at the time, that was probably the best advice at the time. Now you would say, don't do that. Be part of the funeral planning and be part of the grieving and be there. I know my mum and dad sort of regretted that, but I don't mind that they did that because the school was giving probably what they thought was the best advice and mum and dad were receiving that as in, oh, yeah, we'll do that. So I think it took me a long time to realise that Britt was gone, and because we only saw her on the weekends and school holidays, it wasn't perhaps as obvious as it might have been for her siblings here in Launceston because of, well, A, the location of where it occurred, and also her room, so to speak. At our place, it was the spare room, you know. So I remember being probably a few months later, it just really hit me that she was gone, and I became pretty upset. And mum and dad rang my grandparents to come around just to have a little family time. But I think as a kid, you just process things as a kid would, and some ways that's better, I think, or not better. It's just what kids do, and kids cope really well with stuff. Well, they don't cope really well with stuff. They do it in their way, and it's that natural kid way of doing things. I remember I taught a girl once who lost her dad during the school holidays, and I said, oh, you know, so sorry about what's happened. And she said, yeah, but I got an iPod. Like, her grief was real for her dad. She loved her dad and she missed her dad, but kids think a little bit differently than us adults. So I suppose I just felt eventually this really big sense of loss that I had a sister. She was cool. She was older than me. She was fun. We did stuff together, and now that person was gone forever and not coming back. And I guess as you get a bit older, you realise how that impacted on your grandparents, your cousins, your aunties and uncles, your family, your parents' friends, because they felt that as adults. Whereas Soph was a baby, I was 6. You feel it a little bit differently.
How do you think it has shown up for you throughout, you know, sort of up until your teenage years?
I was a bit of a different sort of kid in Burnie. Like, I certainly wasn't rough and tumble like most of the boys in my school and those sorts of things. My best friend was a girl. She still is my best friend. I must have told her once that I was scared that I would die at the same age. Just that kid, you know. Britt died when she was 12. Maybe I would die when I was 12. And I remember for my 13th birthday card, she gave me a card and she said, you made it. And it's like, maybe I just said it, I probably wouldn't have said it jokingly, but I definitely didn't say it with this macabre, deep fear. It was just, this might happen to me too. But kids think things differently. So I think that impacted on perhaps in the back of my mind a bit. Obviously, having family members who are adults who are deep in grief has an impact on you as a kid. I don't know how much or those sorts of things. And I think then just as I got older, when I had my own kids, I was really protective, especially around traffic. I hate seeing kids run up ahead. You know, kids often run up ahead and press the traffic light button or something like that. I just get this, even in car parks. So those sorts of inbuilt, I suppose, responses that you have. And I guess now it's more just a sense of what could have been. You know, what could have been, what might have been, and you don't know. But there's that sort of feeling of loss because you see people with older siblings and you think, oh, I could have had nieces, nephews. You know, those sorts of things you think. And I know for Dad and for Mum, that was a big part too. Now we know a lot of people who are Britt's age, so 50, and what they've done and who they are and their kids. And I think that sort of becomes a stark hurt, I suppose.
Do you think it made you very cautious as a kid?
Yeah. Well, I probably would have been anyway. I'm never really a go-getter. Took me forever to learn to ride a bike, much to my dad's frustration. But yes, it might have been part of that too, that I was reluctant to take risks. I didn't want to go too fast. I didn't want to fang down the hill like my mates were on their bikes. Maybe that was part of it too, because you know that life can be taken away or can go. But then again, I reckon I would have been cautious.
Watching your kids grow up and then get to that age around Britt's age, what has that been like for you?
Yeah, Bonnie, our youngest, was in grade 6 this year, so that did bring up a lot of memories. I am a primary school teacher, so you see the grade 6s leave at the end of each year, and I actually work now at the school Britt was at when she was in grade 6, so last year was my first year there, so it gave me the opportunity to actually talk to the grade 6s about the award and about Britt. I offered to do that, and that was really nice because I actually knew these kids now, so I could actually talk to them, go into their class, show them some photos, explain about why we started the award. and the lead up to that. And that was kind of really special too, because it just gave me another opportunity to keep that name alive and to give that more context, I suppose. So, yeah, like Launceston's a small town, and I work in a sort of slightly separate part of the school, and there's a corridor there has a lot of photos and memories and things like that. And there's a photo of Britt there and the sort of description of the award. And like most mornings, I just walk straight past. Some mornings I stop, it's really nice. And I remember when I first started, a colleague said, "Oh, would you like us to move that?" And I'm like, "Oh, no, please don't. I might move it to a slightly better position actually and give it a little dust." But it's nice. It's tricky, but it's nice. And as time goes by, 40 years is a fair while.
Did you get emotional talking to the kids? Like, did you cry?
My voice was very similar to it is now. It remained in a constant state of crackle.
Yeah.
I said to them, "I'll probably cry, but don't feel bad." And I said, don't go, "Oh, I shouldn't have asked that question." I said, you never know when the emotion's going to hit when you're talking about something that's so significant to you. And sometimes it could just be the most minor little thought process, it's not actually telling the traumatic bits. But they ask really good questions. I know these kids as their art teacher. I don't really know them as their classroom teacher. So the relationship in that hour or half hour was so different. It was a much different relationship. But they asked great questions, and I think they even then thought, "Oh, I'd really like to win that award." A few of them were like, "What should I do?" I said, "Just be a good person," because that's what the award's about. It's not about being the best. It's not about being the fastest. It's just be yourself and be a nice person. That's how we set it up as the award.
That's amazing. Does it physically feel healing to have been able to have those opportunities to do that?
For us, it has been.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think back in the early days, the playground was like, put that there, we'll put a plaque on it and sort of not tick that box. That's making it sound simple, but that was a here and now thing. And I thought the award just could be another way of keeping the name alive. So that's been good. And I was able to actually, when I started working at the school, go back through the archives and find some photos Mum and Dad hadn't seen. So that's really nice. And one of the boys my son plays soccer with, his mum went to school with Britt and knew her in early primary school years. So she's found some photos too in the old albums that are stashed away. It's so good to see those photos, because when you lose somebody, you've only got those photos. You've only got the ones you've got. And I'm sure maybe Britt's mum's got some we haven't seen before, and that's her collection. But we've got our collection. And when someone comes along with a new photo, it's like, "Oh, check that out." It's really special.
That must have been amazing to see that.
Yeah, and it's just like a little ticket or something from the past to give you another little ride somewhere.
When you were a kid, did you get asked about how many siblings have you got, or was it somewhat contained because she didn't go to your school?
Yeah, it was a bit. I remember when Mum and Dad would have a barbecue and maybe there'd be the extra kids there. And sometimes they'd say, "Oh, did your sister die?" And we'd just talk about it. Can't even remember what I'd say. "Yeah, she did," But I think it's like a curiosity when you're a kid, isn't it? It's a bit like when your kids see someone in a wheelchair. It's like, it's not meant from probing or sticky beaking. It's just, "Oh, that's different,"
It's very matter of fact as a kid, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess in a way her classmates would have been impacted, but we were a little bit separate from that because we're in Burnie. So her class came to her funeral, which was really nice. I didn't know that till recently either. So that connection was a little bit disjointed, I suppose.
When you get asked now as an adult, is it easy to say that you do have two sisters? Does it still catch in your throat?
It does still a bit, yeah. So it's more when you get to know someone a little bit better, you might sort of go down that path a bit. And I suppose it's not part of daily conversation these days, but it is always nice to talk about and explain if the environment's right. And often people think, "Oh, I'm so sorry." But it's like, no, it's not. Don't be sorry for asking, or don't be sorry for bringing that up, because if I didn't want to talk about it, I wouldn't. But I do. It'd be like Dad with a tattoo. If I didn't want to talk about it, I wouldn't get the tattoo, or I'd wear a long sleeve shirt to golf. I do want to talk about it. Yeah, I'll probably get a bit teary or a bit emotional in the few seconds or minutes we're talking about this, but that's okay because that's important to me.
I think it's really fascinating, the crying thing, and how we see crying as a weakness, but crying is just another emotion. It's like trying to stifle a laugh.
Yeah.
Like if you found something funny.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the same, and I wish society in general would stop seeing crying as a weakness.
Yeah, I suppose, like I was saying, growing up in Burnie in the 80s as a kid, boys were tough. Like, it was a tough town. It was an industrial town. I'm probably talking about Australia in general, the world in general really, but I've always been an emotional person, always will be. And I'm not ashamed of that. And I suppose because I've seen Dad cry, seen my grandfathers cry at weddings. It's not just it's cry when you're happy, cry when you're sad, cry if you bloody well want to. I certainly don't see it as a weakness anymore. I've been reading books to classes of kids before, and it could just be any old book, and you read some line, it just gets you, and they're like, "Are you crying?" I'm like, "Yeah." They're like, "Oh, this is a bit weird." I'm like, "Yeah, but I'll be okay."
Or like a Bluey episode, and you're like, "Oh my God, it made me cry."
It got me hard. I remember looking across at my dad once when I was a teenager, watching Backyard Blitz, and he was crying. I'm like, "Dad, it's Backyard Blitz." He's like, "But it's beautiful what they've done for that family." So yeah, it's kind of normal in our house, and I think when you've been through significant grief, it is normal because you are going to cry. And I remember Joe Biden talking about the loss of his son, and he said, for a long time you cry when you think of that person, but eventually then you smile. And I guess that's kind of where we're at now. We still cry, but we also smile because over a long period of time you are able to cope in a different way, I suppose. It's not as raw, not as now, not as new, I suppose.
Yeah, I like there's a plethora of really great analogies. One in particular I like is it's like an open wound and there's scar tissue now over it. It would be very easy for that scar to be torn open. It's much more delicate and sensitive to the rest of your skin, but it has healed somewhat. And I quite like that analogy, yeah.
It's still noticeable.
Yep, that's right.
Still hurts a bit.
As an adult now and as a father, do you have any advice for someone out there that might be experiencing the loss of a child or experiencing a loss and there are other siblings that are trying to navigate that? Would you give them any sort of advice as to what you could or what not to do?
I think it's just about being yourself. Like, it's such a cliche thing to say, but feel things how you want to feel them, I suppose. Like if you want to go and create some sort of memorial in the backyard, go and do that. If that's what you want to do, if you want to talk about it. If you don't, then that's okay too. But just know you'll never be alone. Like you'll never be alone in that awful situation. There'll be someone, whoever that might be. Like, as I said, my bestie Kirsty, she knew me. She knew me deeply and she knew what I'd been through. And we just kept each other company. We were just inseparable as kids and still see each other as adults and we're still inseparable, but it's just you've got to have someone. Because my sister was 6 years younger, she wasn't that close in age sibling. She was the little sibling. We have a lot in common. So I suppose as a kid you need a little gang, even if it's a gang of one, a weirdo gang of one.
Do you think, would a good bit of advice be not show emotion, like as parents, don't not show that emotion to the other siblings that are still here? Because do you think it helps you process as a child?
I think so. And knowing that other people, adults, your mentors, the people you look up to, the people that are your rocks, they're feeling what you're feeling just in a different way. I certainly would not be ashamed of the emotion and where it might hit. And because it could hit when you're giving a speech, it could hit when you're in a job interview, who knows? But I think that's okay because that's who we are as humans. And if you try and bury that shit too deep, it may not come out as you want it to.
I've witnessed where the adults think they need to hide it from children and they think they're doing them a good thing by shielding them. And I guess for James and I, we certainly did try and shield Claude from a fair bit of it, but we needed him and wanted him to see when we were crying and what we were crying about. And
why you're feeling the way you're feeling. Yeah. And that he was feeling it just in a much different sort of headspace to you.
That's right. Yep. And a different comprehension. But then I think at the same time you think they don't quite comprehend, but my goodness, they do.
They do. And it's just in that sort of kid world, which is such a nice world to be in. I think it has its challenges and it has its pain, but they do say kids handle grief better than adults. And I don't know all the science and research and stuff, but I think it's just the matter of factness and it is what it is. And I can say it, but I can also still have fun. I can also still be happy. I can also still laugh and go about my day and enjoy the things that I have always enjoyed. And I'm not going to just stop everything, which is probably what we do as adults. We just stop everything. We stop laughing, smiling, watching movies, whatever it is we like. We stop that because it's like, oh, I can't do that because I'm too sad.
It's such a great point that the kids have this amazing ability to just pick it up and put it down, whereas we, I think as adults, we complicate it so much.
Yep.
We add on so much to it and we have this expectation we need to I know for me, I used to think I needed to outwardly show my pain and grief, like in my body language, the way I'd walk down the street, the way I'd sit. I needed the world to see that I was in pain. But kids are just like, oh, yeah, you know, when we took Claude to school for the first time, just after he died, and another parent messaged and said, oh, I overheard Claude in a conversation. And they said, oh, what did you do? What happened in school holidays? He said, oh, my brother died. And the other boy went, oh, okay. And then they just went off and played. But at least the boy, the friend acknowledged it.
Yeah.
And Claude said it for one. The friend acknowledged it, and then they just went off, and it was fine. But I think we as adults, we overcomplicate it.
Yeah, and we just stress so much about what we're going to say or how you're going to tackle it. And even myself, when a friend's lost a parent or something like that, you just think, oh, you dread that phone call almost. It's like, oh, you've got to really get that courage up to ring, and then at the funeral, those sorts of things, you still find yourself sort of hiding away or something, even though you think, oh, that needs a hug or a joke even. Like, you know, you know what I mean? Like they need you to be you.
Yes.
And to try and just be there. And often I think people just think, oh, I can't handle that.
Which if it's you being you, they definitely need a joke.
A lame one.
Looking back, if you were to tell little 6-year-old Brock something to get him through that painful time, is there a little something you'd say, a piece of advice that you've learnt in all your many years now?
I suppose we're tougher than we think we are. You can cope with stuff. You can get through stuff. I suppose to me it's like remain that inner child in a way. Like don't just give up everything because something bad's happened. You still got to have your fun and have your laughs and have your joy. Yes, feel the feels, but there's a time where you need to still go off and play with your mate at childcare. And also I suppose that notion of having people around you that will love you regardless and just keep going with you.
That's really beautiful. Thank you so much for joining me and talking about your beautiful sister, Britt.
Thank you. It's been nice chatting to you.
Pleasure. Thank you. Joining me to unpack the last interview is Caroline Thane. Caroline is an occupational therapist, witness intermediary, and clinical leader working within a national youth mental health service. She has expertise in trauma-informed practice, grief and loss, clinical governance, content development and service improvement. Caroline has a special interest in media, communication and participation, and is passionate about supporting young people and families through complex challenges while helping to create systems that are safe, accessible and responsive to their needs. Caroline also brings personal lived experience of grief and loss to her work. Following the death of her stepfather during adolescence, she developed an early understanding of the profound impact that loss can have on young people and families. This experience has shaped her commitment to ensuring that conversations about grief are compassionate, honest, and grounded in hope. It has also fostered a deep appreciation for the importance of connection, support, and meaningful communication during times of adversity. Welcome, Caroline. Hello, Caroline.
Hi, Bianca. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Well, thank you.
That is good. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Brock, what a great and like a story told with so much love.
Yeah.
And particularly for me, I loved hearing about the way his father has grieved and what he's done for, and I'm stereotyping, but for that generation.
Yeah.
Being able to talk about it, to say her name, to get tattoos later, to have these rituals, I think it was really, really special to hear.
Yeah.
But I'm really interested to hear what some of your biggest takeaways were from Brock's episode.
I think one really important part is that we learn how to grieve through our families, and that can be quite layered in terms of your cultural background, what your family values are, what you see role modelled. And I think they're really important takeaways to think about. What are the things you've learnt if you're an adult listening to this podcast, thinking about what are the stories and what are those sometimes untold stories, I would say, around how you've learnt to deal with emotions or things like grief. And I think they can be really cementing when we then go through experiences in adulthood. I think they're really important things to consider, and then in consideration of how we then hand them down to our own children if we have children of our own.
I absolutely couldn't agree more. I remember in the early stages, not right at the beginning, but I remember in the early stages of going to see a psychologist after Herb, And I guess I was lamenting in the way that we had grieved, or how I just didn't know how to do this grief thing.
Yeah.
And she asked me, she said, well, can you remember how your family grieved? Were there any deaths that you remembered in your childhood? And I was like, oh, God, well, sort of. And it was just like, oh, well, the funeral's here and done, and off you go back into normal life. There was no rituals for us. There was no continuity of grief. It was very much don't talk about it, don't discuss it. So it made sense that the examples that we've been given from a young age can then inform the way that we grieve when we're adults. And you're right, I think it's such an important thing to consider if there are children around. How can we – I mean, you're in the worst time of your life, right, but can you model it so that it's a healthier grieving process for everyone involved?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's important, as you say, to bring it into the front of your mind and think about what were the parts of those experiences as a younger version of myself that I can improve upon. What are the things I really appreciated? And I think when I think about myself, my mum's background was nursing, and so she was very, very open about details of death and dying, and unfortunately we had quite a bit through my teenage years. And as a result, we had a lot of traditions. We did a lot of talking about the detail, including things like seeing bodies and things like that. But that was a really important part of our family and how we did it. And I think as an adult, I understand probably a bit more deeply around choice being important through that process. And I think maybe there were some things I would have liked to have had more choice in. But as you say, going back to your point, it's helpful to think about what were those experiences that we found helpful, and what do we want those to look like in our adult life.
And through your work, do you see this as a common theme maybe pop up for people to go and you ask themselves that question I was asked, what did you experience as a child? And is it like it's a light bulb moment, isn't it, to go, oh, well, what I know of grief is only the experience I had when I was a child.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's also a really beautiful question, a really helpful question, because it can also allow you to think back to what are the coping skills I've had through my life, especially, as you say, when you're in the depths of it and you can feel quite a lot of despair, to think back to actually how did we manage those other difficult times through those years. But I think it's also important to think about when it happens for you for the first time, when you have a significant grief for the first time. And that can, make you feel all at sea. I think the other part of what Brock was talking about, I think we sometimes think about grief and we think of gender norms. And I think certainly males can sometimes have that stigma associated to them around you must carry on, you must move forward, don't show those emotions that are particularly female, which of course we know now to be very unhelpful. And I think it's really important for males to step into all those feelings as humans. It shouldn't be gendered, but I think it's important to sometimes understand that those stereotypes or those feelings can come forward. And I think, again, unless we make those conscious in our mind, they can drive behaviours that are more unhealthy, so that internalising of feeling. And so I think it's important to bring those to the front of mind so you're able to process them and think about, why am I feeling this way? Why is it that I feel like I can't cry in front of my family when I know it's actually really important, or I know it's important that I process this? So, yeah, I think some of those stereotypes can come forward for sure, and I think it's important to name them out loud. And
then would you say to try to combat that internalising would be to whatever the opposite of internalising is expel it, is to actually talk about it?
Externalising, yeah. And I think it's people will process feelings differently. And I think some people are much more overt and expressive. And I think as long as you're processing in a way that feels right for you, that feels healthy for you, then that's the most important thing. I think some people might do a lot of grieving on their own, and that's a choice that they're actively making, and they share it with certain people in their life. And others will be much more open and honest and find it more helpful to share in a more overt way. And I think as long as you're processing and you're moving forward in your journey, that's the most important thing.
I always find it so fascinating when men, or particularly Brock was saying he's a crier. He comes from a long line of men of criers. And I'm like, I really wish that wasn't something that needed to be pointed out. Like it is just an emotion.
Absolutely.
I was talking about it recently with a friend. Crying is as much of emotion and as much as an a response as laughing is. You know, when you see something funny, I'll never forget this. When we were walking down the street in Melbourne, my husband and I, and this guy was carrying a coffee and a cigarette, and he slipped and he didn't want to drop either. He wanted to say, and he went down like a sack of shit. It was hilarious. Yeah. And he saw us and we couldn't help but laugh because he completely axed himself because he wanted to save this coffee and this cigarette.
I will not drop either of these items.
And exactly. And we just couldn't help laughing. Like crying when you try and stifle a laugh, it is hard.
Yeah.
So it's the same with crying, and we've just been sold this really unfair narrative that it's a weakness.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's just another emotion, right?
Yeah, yeah. And that's what was so beautiful about his story, right? I agree. It's a shame he had to sort of say that, but I love that he said it at the same time. It's like there was no shame associated with that, and neither should he have. It's like, I come from a long line of cries. I was like, great, how great.
Yes, yes.
But I remember it reminded me of a session I had, a family session I had once, and the dad of the family said, by the way, I do not do sadness or worry, just so you know. And I remember saying, well, it's funny because I guess you're human, so I think you actually do. I said it much more gently than that. But it's fascinating, you know, it's these rules that we've been given. And I felt actually sadness in that moment that he was hanging on to that so tightly.
One of my favourite parts was Brock telling me about how his best friend had given him that card when he reached the same age as Britt did. And that was like, wow, how intuitive are young people?
Yes.
So much more than we give them credit for. But it just, I mean, I talk about it a lot on this podcast about being seen, heard and acknowledged. And she just knew that was a big milestone for him.
Yeah, beautiful.
I just wanted to highlight that I was so impressed with his friend for doing that.
Because I think it is quite hard, especially for young people if they haven't had an experience of grief or loss, to really deeply understand that. And I've certainly heard that a lot from young people who've had a significant loss in their life and through those high school years or primary years, and their peers don't have an understanding and don't quite know why, even months down the track, where that young person is still showing their grief and sadness. And that can be really hard, really hard. I certainly had that experience myself in high school, having lost my stepdad who died quite suddenly, and then all my peers understanding in the early phase, and then months down the track going, why is Caroline crying? And I'm like, do they not understand? This is still ongoing for me. And my mum, my beautiful mum, was like, darling, they won't. They won't. It's not that they don't care. And that was the most helpful thing she said to me, was do not mistake this as them not caring. They absolutely do. They just don't understand.
Do you think it's that because when we're kids, there's just so much going on for us that it's not front of mind, it's not in front of us?
Yeah. Oh, adolescence it's a lot going on. We're busy trying to work out who we are, let alone where we belong, how we want to identify. We're thinking about sexuality. We're thinking about all sorts of things, right? I look back now and think, some of my thoughts were probably a bit unfair.
No, they were completely warranted, Caroline.
I remember going, how do they not get this?
In your lived experience and in your professional work, what would you say are some of the better things that we can do to support younger people's grief?
Oh, good question. I think that if you have an experience as an adolescent where you're grieving and you've lost someone significant, I think it can be, as I said before, really hard knowing that adolescents, their most important people are their peers at that age and stage. And so unless you've got peers who really understand that and have some emotional intelligence around that, it can be a tricky time. And I think as adults, it can be helpful to help educate the peers around them around these are some of the things that are going to be helpful for this person right now. We don't expect you to take it on, but just understand if they're withdrawn or understand if they're teary. So I think some of that education can definitely be helpful.
That is amazing, and I think that is such a helpful piece of advice, because I think when we're adults we forget, particularly because I've got very young children. I mean, our eldest, he's not quite 10, but he's at that age now where his peers are becoming more influential than adults, and that only magnifies 1,000 once they're an adolescent. And so that's a really great piece of advice to share that information with their peers, with their friends. We always communicate to his new teachers that he has another brother that is not here. He might want to talk about him, but he might not. And if they're doing something like a task where they've got to name all their family members, not so much now that he's a bit older, but certainly those younger tasks when he was prep grade 1, there's always those sorts of activities. So we're like, he might want to talk about his brother, but he also might not. So just letting him have the ball and his court was what was recommended. But sharing that information to go to the peers, I think, is really great.
I think it's important as well, even with your son who's 10, is that the old ways of talking about grief was you don't talk about it and then you won't upset anyone. But then it was this hidden thing that you were managing and it was done in isolation. And so I think that's beautiful that you then give choice to young people around when and how they want to share.
What would you recommend in your experience for people wondering how much do they expose their children, how much do they get involved with either attending funerals, rituals and things like that? I mean, there's an age threshold, of course. Brock acknowledges that that was probably the best advice at the time was that he didn't attend the funeral. In hindsight now and in 2026, we might be doing things slightly differently. What would you sort of say, how can you read the situation or kind of intuitively know what is right and wrong in the moment?
It's a really good question, Bianca. I think it is really important that it's really different for every individual and for every family. So depending on the age and stage of your child, but also depending on what else is going on for your child, what your family values are, the relationship with the person who has died, all those things impact. For example, our eldest went to a funeral when he was in prep, and that was because it was a friend of his from school had lost a sibling had died. And we really felt for him, we did it in a way where he wasn't exposed to all of it, but he was exposed to it in parts because we wanted him to understand how to support his little friend at school. So it was about working out, okay, we want him to understand that this person has died and that his friend will need him and will want to talk about it. There was a beautiful classroom teacher who also did some broad talking about death and dying with the class. And it was a prep class, so a lot of them don't have that understanding of the finality of death. But she did it in a way that was, I would say, really culturally sensitive for the kids in the class. It was very much centred around what the family wanted as well of the young person who died. And it was just done in a way that was really sensitive and age appropriate. So I think it really does depend on understanding the young person in your life, what they understand around the finality of death, thinking about why is it that I want to expose this person to this experience, and kind of thinking about all those parts before you make the decision. And I think, honestly, that can be really hard when you're impacted. So those decisions, I would just say take them slowly, and I think then you will make the right one. I think they're also challenging. We do this thing as humans where we compare each other all the time, and there might be other families that are doing something different. And I think trust your intuition around this is what my young person needs right now, this is what we would do, these are part of our family traditions and values, and therefore I'm making X decision right now.
That's wonderful advice. And I like the piece of advice to just slow down and listen to your intuition. I know as a mother, you can sometimes not trust your gut. You want to overthink. You're influenced by all these different things, social media, other people's experiences. But I think you've really got to trust your gut, don't you? Yeah,
definitely. I think the other aspect that came up in the story is the importance of understanding anniversaries. And they can be things like your children turning the age of the person who died, or so they can look like lots of things. Sometimes they can catch us off guard. And sometimes you can do a lot of thought and a lot of preparation for a particular obvious anniversary and it will come and go and it's okay. So I think it's important to understand sometimes they can really bring up old feelings that feel very familiar. And I think we do this thing as humans where we can think, oh my gosh, I've regressed. But actually it's really normal. It's normal for those feelings to get stirred up again. It's really important that you take time as an adult just to process those things. And again, if you've got them front of mind, you can be more mindful of how your thoughts and worries might be leading you to do certain things as an adult. So with your own family, with your own children. So I think they're really important things to process as they come up and to be thoughtful of.
That is so helpful, even for me, Caroline, because sometimes I feel that the way the anniversaries just fully floor me, I do feel like I've somehow regressed, like, oh God, I'm back to square one of my grief. And not that it's a race or some sort of competition to grieve as quickly or as best as possible, but you do feel like you can kind of put on your brave face better and better with time. Like you think that it's a linear trajectory. And then when an anniversary or a certain date or something comes and hits me for 6, I think, oh my God, I'm like,
yes.
So that's a really lovely reminder.
I think, we give ourselves silly rules like, well, it's year 4 or 5. That means I should be feeling X, which is ridiculous. But it's normal because we like rules as humans. I feel like we like things in boxes and we like things to be predictable.
We do.
And certainly feelings when they're intense and we can't necessarily control them. We'd love to know that that's going to come and it's going to go. So I think I love that idea of just being mindful of the rules that your brain gives you and then just holding them much more lightly and then going, okay, that's okay. I'm just feeling these things today and I'm just going to move through these things. I don't need to have hard and fast rules about this. It's okay.
But I also like that on the flip side when you said rules, I was thinking about that there are kind of rules of anniversaries and grieving that you will, well, not always, but you will most likely lose your shit. You're going to cry. Everything's going to feel awful. You're going to have a grief hangover. People are going to piss you off. People are going to say things wrong. And it's almost like I can almost see like a rule book, like a list of rules for your anniversary days and dates. They never change. I think we think that they'll change with time, that 20 years later the rules will have changed. How you're going to feel on that day will change. And they don't. Like the rules of basketball and football, they don't change. They're always going to be the same. Once you go and play that game, they're going to be the same.
Yeah.
So I feel like we need to remember that when we have experienced a loss.
Yeah, look, sometimes I think I still would challenge it a little bit around, I would say, yes, expect some things to be upsetting that day is much more sort of open than everyone is going to annoy me today. Do you know what I mean? Because then because it can be unnerving if you then don't have that experience. You're like, oh, hang on, I actually felt okay today because I know when I've had that I felt guilt. Well, I've had an okay day today. Why? I should have been sad or I should have been
that's
grumpy.
a good point.
Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
So I think what you're saying is kind of expect, I would say more maybe expect the unexpected and expect to be sensitive maybe but then just I would always say hold those things lightly because if it shifts and you might have a great day on an anniversary and that's okay.
Yeah, that's also true. Yeah. I don't like to be disappointed, Caroline, so I always like to set my expectations quite low, or like if I've entered a competition, I'm never going to win, so that then I'm excited. Yeah. So I'm a cup
set the bar low.
Cup half full, not cup half empty.
Sure.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today and to reflect on beautiful Brock's story and Britt's story. Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. This podcast is dedicated to my son Herbert and to all the fellow grievers out there. I'm sorry that you're here. Be kind to others, but mostly to yourself. Before we wrap up, I'd just like to mention that whilst I do have a degree in behavioural science and have spent years educating myself and researching the topics of trauma and mental health, I'm not a licensed therapist, counsellor or psychologist. Everything I share here is based on personal experience and things I've learnt through education. This podcast is for informational or entertainment purposes only and isn't the substitute for professional advice. If you're struggling, please reach out to a GP or a qualified therapist. You're not alone and there is help available.